My sophomore year of college, I transferred to a new university halfway across the country. It was late August, and I was assigned to a single dorm room in one of the older buildings on campus. It was a little rundown with scuffed floors and dim lighting, but I didn't care. I was just glad to have my own space. The dorm manager, an older guy who looked like he had been working there for decades, handed me the key and mumbled something about the room being empty for a while. I asked why, and he just shrugged and said, "People don't usually stay in that one for long." I didn't think much of it. I had classes to focus on and a job at the campus library to keep me busy. The first few nights were fine, just the usual settling noises of an old building. But by the end of the first week, weird things started happening. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my desk chair rolling across the room. It wasn't a soft nudge either. It was like someone had shoved it with force. I turned on my lamp, and sure enough, my chair was no longer tucked under my desk. It was sitting in the middle of the room, facing my bed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had knocked into it before going to bed and didn't remember. I pushed it back and tried to go back to sleep. The next night, I woke up again at almost the exact same time. This time, my closet door was wide open. I was absolutely sure I had closed it before going to bed. I sat up, staring at the dark space inside, half expecting something to move, but nothing did. I started feeling uneasy being in my own room, especially at night. I kept hearing little sounds, whispers that I could never fully make out, tapping from inside the walls, and even the occasional creak of floorboards when I was sitting completely still. Then, one night, things escalated. I was up late finishing a paper when my door suddenly unlocked and swung open, just enough to create a gap. My heart nearly stopped. The hallway lights barely illuminated the crack in the doorway, but there was no one standing there. I got up, walked to the door, and looked into the hall. It was completely empty. I shut the door, locked it again, and sat back down, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I fell asleep with my lamp on. Sometime around 4 a.m., I woke up to a freezing chill in my room. My blanket had been pulled halfway off my bed, and I swear I could feel someone standing at the foot of it. I refused to move. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, my mattress shifted. It was subtle, like someone had pressed their hands down on the foot of my bed. My breathing became shallow, and I forced myself to stay still. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in on me, and I was too terrified to open my eyes. Minutes passed, maybe even an hour, before the feeling finally lifted. When I finally opened my eyes, my blanket was completely on the floor. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went to the dorm manager and asked if anyone had ever reported weird things happening in my room. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "A few students have complained about strange stuff in there. Some transferred out within weeks. One kid even refused to sleep in the room at all after his first night." He didn't say much else, just gave me a knowing look before going back to his paperwork. I lasted another 3 nights before I requested a room change. I don't know what was in that room, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. College was supposed to be the best years of my life. I was finally on my own, taking the courses I wanted, and living in a city that never seemed to sleep. But by the time my sophomore year started, I found myself wanting nothing more than to forget it all. It started when I enrolled in Professor Alden's psychology class. He was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with deep-set eyes that never seemed to blink enough. He spoke in a slow, deliberate tone that made everything he said feel unsettling. He had this habit of holding eye contact just a little too long with students, especially the girls. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then I started noticing how often his gaze would linger on me during lectures. If I shifted in my seat or looked away, he would smirk, almost like he enjoyed making people uncomfortable. One afternoon, he asked me to stay after class. He said he wanted to discuss my latest paper. When the last student left, he leaned against the edge of his desk and said my writing was very personal, very raw. His fingers drummed against his knee as he stared at me. "A mind like yours is special. People don't see the world like you do," he said. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and mumbled a quick thanks. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a small black notebook. He told me to write down my thoughts whenever I was alone, dreams, fears, anything. "Think of it as an experiment," he added. I forced a smile and left as quickly as I could. That night, I shoved the notebook into the back of my desk drawer and tried not to think about him. But the next morning, when I got to class, something was different. Professor Alden smiled at me when I walked in. Not just any smile, a knowing smile, like he was in on something I wasn't. And then he said it. "Did you write anything down?" I hadn't mentioned the notebook to anyone. I barely even touched it. So, how did he? I muttered some excuse about forgetting, and he just laughed to himself before starting the lecture. I tried to shake it off, but things only got worse from there. One night, I was walking back to my dorm after a late study session at the library. It was just past midnight, and the campus was eerily empty. The only sound was the faint buzzing of the streetlights above me. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see another student, but instead, in the dim light, I saw a tall figure standing just outside the glow of the street lamp. I picked up my pace. The figure didn't move at first, but when I turned the corner toward my dorm, I heard the sound of shoes scraping against pavement. Someone was following me. I sped up. My heart pounded. By the time I reached my building, I was practically running. I swiped my student ID and slammed the door shut behind me. When I turned to look out the glass panel of the entrance, there was no one there. The next morning, I was exhausted. I barely slept. As I sat down in Professor Alden's class, he smiled at me again, but this time his voice was lower. "You shouldn't stay out so late. It's not safe." I froze. I hadn't told anyone about last night. By the end of that week, I was paranoid. I kept seeing glimpses of someone in a dark coat standing across the street from my dorm. I would hear footsteps in the halls at odd hours of the night, only for them to stop when I opened my door. And then one night, something happened that made me absolutely sure I was being watched. It was around 2 a.m. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, so I was alone. I had been tossing and turning for hours when I heard it. The sound of my doorknob jiggling. At first, I thought it was someone drunk, maybe trying to get into the wrong room. But then, the doorknob turned. The lock clicked. Someone had a key. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. The door slowly creaked open an inch, then another. The hallway light spilled into the room, casting a long, dark shadow on the floor. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, as I tried to call campus security. But before I could press dial, the door suddenly shut again. I held my breath, listening. The faint sound of footsteps moving down the hall sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Grabbing the baseball bat under my bed, I tiptoed toward the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. Then, a soft, creaking sound. The floorboards in the hallway groaned as if someone was standing right outside my door. I couldn't take it anymore. I flung the door open, bat raised, ready to swing, and there he was, Professor Alden. He stood in the dimly lit hallway, dressed in a dark overcoat, his hands still resting on my doorknob. His face was eerily calm, like this was nothing unusual. "You're quite the light sleeper," he murmured. My stomach twisted. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it had closed up. Without thinking, I turned and bolted toward the stairwell. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps unnervingly slow and deliberate. He wasn't running, he was walking, as if he knew I had nowhere to go. I practically tripped down the stairs, shoving through the emergency exit and bursting onto the cold, empty campus. My fingers fumbled to call security as I ran, but my hands were shaking too badly to press the right numbers. Then, finally, I heard the voice on the other end. "Campus security, what's your emergency?" I barely had time to explain before I reached the security office. The guards saw me running toward them and met me at the door. When I told them what happened, they didn't look surprised. One of the officers exchanged a glance with the other before sighing. "You should pack your things," he said. "This isn't the first time we've had complaints about him." My stomach sank. "So why is he still here?" I asked. The officer's jaw tightened. "Because no one ever catches him in the act." The next day, I packed my bags and left campus for good. I never set foot in that university again. But the worst part? Professor Alden never got fired. He still teaches at that school to this day. It was midterms week, and I had been at the campus library later than usual. It was one of those older university libraries, the kind with wooden desks, flickering fluorescent lights, and a smell of old books that never seemed to fade. The top floor, where I liked to study, was almost always empty at night. Most students preferred the group study rooms downstairs, but I liked the quiet. That night, I had lost track of time. When I finally checked the clock, it was past 2 a.m. The library officially closed at 3, but I figured I should pack up soon. As I stretched and rubbed my eyes, I noticed something strange. The sound of pages flipping. At first, I thought it was just another student, but when I looked around, there was no one. I brushed it off. Probably the air vents moving loose paper around. I gathered my stuff and started toward the stairs when I heard footsteps. Not heavy, but slow and deliberate. The kind that made you stop and listen. I turned the corner and saw someone standing at the end of the aisle. A man dressed in dark clothes staring down at an open book in his hands. I let out a breath, relieved. Just another student. But something felt off. I took a step forward and the man snapped his head up. Not gradually, not normally, but like he had just realized I was there all at once. I froze. His eyes locked onto mine, and he didn't blink. I forced an awkward smile and mumbled, "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." No response. I turned away and walked faster toward the stairs. But when I reached the door to the stairwell, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I had seen that man before. Earlier that night, when I first got to the library, I had passed by the glass case near the entrance. Inside it were old faculty photos, professors who had worked at the university decades ago. His face was in one of them. A much younger version, but the same man. I didn't look back. I shoved open the stairwell door and ran down the steps 2 at a time, heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I was outside, under the streetlights, where I could breathe again. The next morning, I went back. I told myself I had imagined it, that I was just exhausted. But when I checked the glass case, I found the photo I was looking for. His name was Dr. Charles Whitman, a former professor of literature. He had been dead for 30 years.